A tractor coughs smoke and sputters to silence at the edge of an orchard. A lifeless hulk stranded beneath a blazing Midwestern sky. The land around it crackles with dryness, the soil thirsting desperately beneath rows of apple trees bending low with the weight of uncertain harvests. From a worn farmhouse porch, a weary man watches, his face etched with lines carved by loss and worry. In the distance, storm clouds gather, darkening horizons and whispering promises or threats of change. Life has taught him painfully well. Hope can appear in strange disguises, and betrayal often comes wrapped in offers too good to refuse. But survival has never been about trusting blindly. It's about facing the fire head on, knowing full well that sometimes the only way to save what matters is to risk everything you've ever known. Dale Morgan was 63 years old, his hair long since turned silver at the temples, and his hands calloused from a lifetime of hard work under the Midwestern sun. Years ago, he had served as a mechanic in the Army, a skill that followed him back to civilian life like a loyal dog. Now he spent his days on the Morgan family orchard, a plot of land inherited from his father, who had inherited it from his father, stretching back generations. The place was old, the paint on the barn peeling, the fences leaning, and the irrigation lines in constant need of patching. Dale's routine rarely changed up at dawn, a quick sip of black coffee, then out to the orchard to tend his aging apple trees. He had two daughters to provide for: Natalie, a steady-minded 16-year-old who dreamed of engineering feats and read science journals in the loft of the barn, and Chloe, 10, a bright-eyed dreamer who believed the orchard was full of hidden magic. They were the reasons he forced his aching knees to keep moving every morning. Dale's wife, Evelyn, had passed away nearly 5 years earlier. She had been his partner in every sense, tending the orchard side by side, canning applesauce for the winter, and creating a warm home out of these dusty old walls. Cancer took her abruptly, leaving Dale a single parent with heartbreak too big to put into words. The orchard, once bursting with new ideas and gentle laughter, felt heavier in her absence. Financial burdens mounted steadily: loan notices from the bank, overdue bills for irrigation repairs, and the slow but relentless wear of equipment that he could barely afford to fix. One early August morning, Dale found himself leaning on the hood of his rust-eaten pickup, dreading the sight of another letter from the bank that lay on his passenger seat. He glanced toward the orchard rows where Natalie and Chloe were supposed to be checking for signs of pests. Knowing his girls, they had likely turned the chore into an adventure, especially Chloe, who would spin tales of orchard sprites. He tried to summon a faint smile. At least they still saw magic in this place. At his age, all he saw were spreadsheets in the red and trees that demanded water he didn't have. He decided to distract himself by walking the perimeter fence. The orchard's southern boundary ran alongside a narrow dirt road, usually empty of traffic except for the occasional mail carrier or neighbor's tractor. As he reached the far corner by a rusty gate, he heard an engine sputter mechanical coughs that reminded him of something about to break. Within moments, a tractor appeared, trailing thick smoke. It didn't look like any brand he recognized. The design was sleek, modern, but clearly in distress. The driver was a woman in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a simple canvas jacket. She brought the machine to a grinding halt near his gate and hopped off, cursing softly under her breath. Dale's instincts took over. Broken machinery was a puzzle he could solve, and neighborly courtesy had been ingrained in him since childhood. Whether she was a local he'd never met or someone passing through, his father had taught him, if someone's stuck, you help. So he approached, careful not to startle her. At first glance, she looked anxious, maybe overwhelmed. Once close, he could see her jacket was dusty, but brand new, and her fingernails were two clean signs that told him she wasn't a seasoned farmer. He called out, "Need a hand?" She glanced up with relief in her eyes. "I'd appreciate it," she said, sounding a little sheepish. "I'm supposed to know how to manage this thing, but it's giving me all sorts of trouble." Her voice carried a polished accent, the kind Dale had heard from out-of-towners visiting the orchard on weekends. He lifted the tractor's hood, letting out a low whistle at the snarl of wires and hoses. This was no ordinary piece of rural equipment. It looked half computer, half metal beast. He traced the line of a cracked hose that leaked fluid, maybe coolant, maybe something else. The entire contraption seemed miswired, like someone had installed advanced technology but never tested it in real field conditions. "My name's Dale. By the way," he said, rummaging in his pocket for a rag. "Dale Morgan. And you are." She straightened her shoulders as if deciding how much information to reveal. "Victoria Caldwell," she offered, glancing away. "I'm new in town, you could say." Dale didn't press, though he wondered how someone new in town got a hold of such a fancy tractor. Instead, he focused on the practical matter of repairing the machine. He reached into his old pickup, grabbed a small toolbox, and started methodically checking hoses, clamps, fluid reservoirs, and the main belt tension. While he worked, Victoria asked questions, pointed ones. She wanted to know how local farmers handled repairs, where they sourced parts, how they managed pivot irrigation systems. Dale found it slightly odd that a supposed newcomer had so many specific, technical inquiries, but he chalked it up to simple curiosity. Maybe she had just purchased a small farm or orchard of her own. The tractor, under Dale's practiced hands, grudgingly came back to life. The key was finding a workaround for the cracked coolant hose. He replaced it with a spare bit of tubing he had in his truck, making a tight seal with clamps. When he fired up the engine, it coughed, spat out some black smoke, and then settled into a lower rumble. "It'll get you where you need to go, at least for today," Dale said, wiping grease off his fingers. "Though I'd recommend you take it in for a real fix. This is just a Band-Aid." Victoria stood back, arms crossed, observing him with an odd intensity. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm grateful." She looked down at the ground, as if searching for something else to say. Finally, she pulled out a small wallet. "What do I owe you?" Dale shook his head. "Nothing. We don't charge neighbors for a hand with a busted piece of equipment. Couldn't look my late father in the eye if I did." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, but her voice turned serious. "Your father must have taught you well. Not everyone is so helpful these days." She tucked the wallet away. "I'm sure we'll cross paths again. Dale Morgan." Then she climbed onto the tractor and rolled away, the repaired engine still complaining, but at least no longer billowing thick smoke. Dale watched until she disappeared around the bend. He realized she had never mentioned exactly where she was headed, nor had she explained why such an advanced tractor was on a back road by his orchard. By the time he returned to the house, Natalie and Chloe were there, each armed with baskets of slightly bruised apples. "Dad, you won't believe the weird noise we heard, like a plane engine or something," Chloe said excitedly. Natalie shot Dale a look. She was always the more perceptive one, noticing the new smears of grease on his forearm. Dale shrugged, deciding not to mention Victoria Caldwell. He doubted they'd ever see her again. That night, Dale sat at the old pine kitchen table. Bills and letters were spread out in front of him like a losing hand of poker, the bank's final notice, the irrigation specialist's overdue invoice, and a property tax reminder that made his stomach drop. The orchard needed 1,000 different fixes, from new piping to better pest control methods, but he couldn't scrape together enough funds. Natalie and Chloe had done all they could, picking apples, helping him patch fences, even selling homemade cider in the local market. It simply wasn't enough. A sense of guilt weighed on him. He was a father who couldn't keep his daughters from shouldering adult worries. He glanced at the old black and white photo of his father on the wall. Then his gaze drifted to a framed portrait of Evelyn, her eyes bright with that unwavering optimism she always carried. She'd once said, "You can be proud, but never so proud you refuse a helping hand." How many times had he refused help already? A pang of regret shot through him, thinking of the tractor incident earlier. Sure, he had helped Victoria, but maybe he should have accepted some form of payment if it meant keeping the orchard afloat. Natalie's footsteps on the stairs announced her late-night presence. She wore one of Evelyn's old aprons over her t-shirt. Having just finished in the kitchen with Chloe, "We made apple turnovers for tomorrow," she said. Then she frowned at the sea of papers. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Dale leaned back, trying to muster a reassuring grin. "We'll manage," he replied, though his voice rang hollow even to himself. Natalie rubbed her hands on the apron. "We could consider selling a small piece of the land, maybe. Or you could do more repair work for neighbors like you did today with that tractor." Dale shook his head. "We'd have to start with an actual tractor to fix," he joked half-heartedly. But the truth stung. There just weren't enough neighbors who could pay him what a professional mechanic might earn in town. Night fell deeper, and once Natalie went back to her room, Dale took out a wrinkled letter from Evelyn, something she had written when her illness became terminal. He'd read it only once before, on the night of her funeral. The letter spoke of love, of the orchard's legacy, of how she wanted him to keep fighting for this land, but never at the cost of losing the memories or his health. He hadn't felt strong enough to reread it until now. "Dale," it began, in her graceful script, "if you're reading this, I'm probably gone, and the orchard seems impossible to manage alone. But remember, our real legacy is in the way we raise our daughters and love our neighbors. If you ever feel your pride holding you back from something that could save our home, please lay that pride aside. My last request is simple. Don't stop living just because I'm not there." The words blurred in the lamplight. He carefully folded the letter back. Pride was a stubborn companion, he realized, but so was the longing to preserve what Evelyn had helped build. With a sigh, he rose from the table, turned off the single overhead bulb, and climbed the creaky stairs to bed. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would find a way to keep the orchard alive somehow. Dale's morning started with a thunderous sound he'd never heard near his orchard before, a low, reverberating roar that rattled the window panes. It was so unexpected he almost dropped his coffee cup. Natalie and Chloe, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, rushed to the porch. Outside, a sleek single-engine plane circled the orchard's perimeter, descending in precarious arcs that kicked up dust along the south boundary road. He was halfway out the door, boots untied and jacket half on, when the plane finally touched down with a rough bounce on the makeshift runway, the same dirt road where he had found Victoria's tractor the previous day. The craft eventually rolled to a stop beneath a canopy of orchard trees, as if it belonged there. Dale blinked, trying to decide if he was still asleep and dreaming. But no, it was real. And as he approached the plane cautiously, he saw a figure climb down Victoria Caldwell herself, wearing jeans, boots, and a bomber-style jacket. "Morning," she called out over the whine of the cooling engine. Her demeanor was impossibly calm, as though landing on a rutted dirt path next to an orchard was just another day in her life. Dale's daughters appeared behind him, both wide-eyed. Chloe was the first to speak. "That's a really small plane," she said in awe. Victoria chuckled. "It is. I call it my field hopper. You must be Chloe and you're Natalie." "Right, Natalie." Never one to hide her curiosity, demanded. "How do you know our names?" Victoria shrugged. "I did a little research on the orchard after I left yesterday. You saved my tractor, figured I'd learn more about the man behind the repair." She motioned toward the orchard, as if offering an explanation. "I run a company that designs advanced agricultural equipment. I test prototypes in real-world conditions." Yesterday was a test gone very, very wrong. Dale processed her words, his suspicion rising. Why would a high-powered executive personally test a faulty tractor on some back road? And why was she here now, in a small plane, acting like they were longtime acquaintances? She seemed to sense his unease because she turned serious. "I'm going to be honest. My board of directors is pushing for high-tech solutions that don't translate on the ground. Farmers complain they can't repair these new tractors without specialized tools. I wanted to see for myself. That's why I took that prototype out alone. Chloe tugged on Dale's sleeve. But why here, Dad's orchard? We're just a small place. Victoria's gaze flickered past the trees, where the sun glinted off battered irrigation lines. Because I was curious about places that have been feeding America for generations like yours. And I was impressed by how Dale handled the tractor. Fast, intuitive repairs. No fuss. Dale tried not to show his reaction, but a sense of guarded pride flickered across his heart. Anyone in this county would have done the same. He said simply. Victoria shook her head, unconvinced. I doubt that. But let's get to the point. I came to talk business. My company needs someone with your experience, your real-world experience, to advise us on making machines that don't break so easily and, if they do, can be fixed by folks like you. No high-end city shops, no arcane computer codes, just common sense engineering. Dale narrowed his eyes. And what exactly are you offering? She paused, glancing at the orchard. We'll get to that. But first, can I look around? Dale led Victoria through the orchard, Chloe skipping ahead, occasionally pointing to an apple tree she had named or some bird's nest precariously perched in the branches. Natalie followed behind, still studying Victoria carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle. The orchard was calm this early in the morning, the cicadas just beginning their chatter, the breeze rustling leaves and the sunlight turning everything gold. For a moment, it felt surreal to be giving a tour to a woman who had landed a plane on a dirt road like it was no big deal. They walked past the weathered barn, which housed half a dozen old farming implements, some so outdated that only Dale knew how to keep them running. They passed the irrigation lines, DIY patch jobs that left a tangle of pipes in places. At each stop, Victoria asked precise questions, not just about the machinery, but about the orchard's finances, the local soil composition, water rights, and state regulations. Her knowledge of agricultural policy seemed far beyond that of a casual visitor. Eventually, they ended up at a large oak tree near the center of the property. A makeshift picnic table sat in its shade, where Evelyn once insisted they eat lunch on Sundays. The memory tightened Dale's chest, but he kept it to himself. Victoria placed her hand on the table's worn surface and turned to face him. This orchard is in trouble, isn't it? She said softly. Dale bristled at the directness, but he didn't deny it. The orchard's not the only place, he said, glancing at a stack of leftover boards from a half-finished shed. Farms all over this county are hurting. Victoria nodded. I read about the new water restrictions and about the bank's aggressive foreclosure policy. I'm sorry. Before Dale could formulate a response, she continued. What if I told you there's a way out? My company has a new initiative, a rural revitalization program. They're calling it internally, but it needs actual farmers and mechanics who can guide the design process. We want to build simpler, cheaper, more robust farming equipment that can be fixed in the field. And we'll pay for the expertise, Dale shrugged. And where do I come in? He wanted to keep his voice steady, but there was a tremor beneath his bravado. We can't move to Chicago or anything. The orchard's been in my family for generations. My daughters grew up here. My wife. He stopped short, clearing his throat. Victoria's eyes softened. I'm not asking you to move. In fact, I'd like your orchard to be a test site. We'd install new prototypes, see how they fare, and we'd hire you officially as a consultant. Full salary, benefits, and possibly infrastructure support to keep your orchard viable. A hush fell between them, except for the rustling leaves and Chloe's distant giggles. Dale felt the weight of bills and responsibilities pressing against his mind. It sounded too good, too much like a miracle. Men in their 60s don't get random windfalls, nor do they get asked to join cutting-edge initiatives out of nowhere. He glanced at Natalie, whose cautious expression mirrored his own. This is a lot, he finally managed. I need time to think. Victoria nodded. Of course, I wouldn't expect you to sign on the dotted line today. I have to meet with the board next week. But I wanted to speak to you face to face first. Let me help you. Dale, you helped me when my tractor was stuck. Let me return the favor in a way that lasts. That evening, after Victoria left in her small plane, its roar fading into a pinkish sunset, Dale found himself at the kitchen table again, with Natalie and Chloe seated across from him like inquisitive jurors. He'd explained the proposition as best he could in an official consulting role with Victoria's company. Decent pay, plus potential modernization of the orchard, it all sounded fantastic, borderline unbelievable. Chloe's eyes gleamed with hope, imagining new possibilities. Maybe they could finally fix the barn roof or invest in a better well. Natalie, however, was more reserved. Dad, she said, crossing her arms, you know I'm all for new tech and modernization, but don't you think it's strange she's just handing us a lifeline? Dale exhaled. Yes, I do. But that tractor fiasco felt genuine. She wasn't faking those mechanical issues. In her questions, she knew this orchard was in trouble. It's possible she's sincere about wanting real farmers to guide development. A city-based corporate design team usually has no clue how to fix equipment in the middle of a field. Chloe piped in. Mom always said you shouldn't mistrust someone just because they have money or a fancy job. She said sometimes the best help comes from unexpected places. Dale smiled at the recollection. That was indeed Evelyn's philosophy. But part of him worried, could this be a corporate trap, or was it the orchard's last chance? He looked down at Evelyn's letter, which he had kept in his breast pocket all day. Your mother did say not to let pride get in the way. He murmured, if this program can save the orchard, if it can give us a future here. He noticed tears welling up in Natalie's eyes, and he felt his own chest tighten. The orchard meant everything to them. A piece of Evelyn still lived among these trees. Later, when the girls went upstairs, he stepped outside to the porch with the letter in hand. Fireflies floated in the thick summer air, and the orchard's rows were silhouettes against a deepening sky. He recalled how Evelyn would read seed catalogs out here, dreaming of new varieties to plant. The faint smell of apples drifted on the breeze. He unfolded the letter, scanning again those final words. Our real legacy is in the way we raise our daughters and love our neighbors. If you ever feel your pride holding you back from something that could save our home, lay that pride aside. The message struck him anew. He had always been so determined to do everything on his own, a trait drilled into him by his father. But maybe the orchard's survival demanded a different approach now. At the same time, doubt lingered. Was Victoria truly one of the neighbors Evelyn referred to? Or just a corporate executive looking to patch her public image with a feel-good rural project? Dale sighed, rubbing his temples. He hated uncertainty, especially when his family's future was at stake. But as he stood there, he felt a small stirring of hope. Perhaps Evelyn's words, like seeds, needed time to root before they grew into something life-changing. Dale woke the next morning to find Victoria had emailed him a formal proposal. Natalie, being the more tech-savvy, helped him read through the attached PDFs, a consultant contract detailing duties, monthly compensation enough to cover the orchard's debts, and a section about on-site equipment testing. The final pages showed conceptual designs for simpler tractor engines, modular parts, and user-friendly electronics. Though the language was corporate, the intent was clearer. They wanted Dale's hands-on knowledge to ensure these prototypes actually worked in places like his orchard. Still skeptical, he hopped into his pickup and drove to town. Despite the orchard's closeness to farmland, the local main street bustled with a few shops, a feed store, a tiny bank, and not much else. He greeted neighbors who asked about the noise of the plane, and he offered vague explanations, didn't want to draw attention to something he wasn't sure about yet. Eventually, he parked in front of the local library, a small brick building flanked by rose bushes. If anyone could help him dig up facts, it was Mabel Carter, the librarian who'd known Dale since he was a boy. Inside, he found Mabel at her usual station, scanning new arrivals. Her white hair was pinned in a neat bun, and her reading glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Dale explained he needed background on a company affiliated with a woman named Victoria Caldwell. Mabel's brow shot up. Caldwell, as in Caldwell Innovation and Agriculture. Good heavens, that's one of the biggest players in advanced farming tech. They've merged with multiple entities over the last decade. She clicked her keyboard, pulling up articles, financial statements, and press releases. Within minutes, Dale learned that Caldwell Innovation had indeed been under pressure for creating equipment with high-tech solutions that small farmers found too expensive and too difficult to maintain. Some articles praised the company for pushing boundaries. Others accused it of ignoring the practical realities of rural life. Tucked in a corner of one investigative piece was a mention that the new CEO, Victoria Caldwell, had once abruptly cut short a major product launch to personally test a machine in the field. Dale suspected that was the fiasco he had witnessed. He left the library with a thick stack of printouts. On the way back, he stopped at a diner for coffee. There, he ran into Walt Anderson, an old friend who owned the neighboring farmland. Walt commented on the plane that had buzzed overhead. Word travels fast. People saying, "You got some fancy executive sniffing around. Better be careful, Dale." Walt's tone wasn't hostile, just concerned. Them big companies can swallow you whole if you aren't watching. By the time Dale returned home, he felt both reassured and wary. Yes, Caldwell was big and powerful, but the part about Victoria personally testing her prototypes suggested she wasn't just a corporate figurehead. Maybe she truly wanted to fix the disconnect between engineers in skyscrapers and farmers in dusty overalls. He spent the rest of the day in the orchard, repairing a broken irrigation head, letting the rhythmic drip of water soothe him. Ultimately, the orchard's dryness was a tangible problem, something a new paycheck might solve. Days passed, and each sunrise found Dale wrestling with a decision that could reshape his life. He needed to reply to Victoria, who was due at her board meeting soon. Natalie and Chloe took to discussing Mom's letter every evening, as though Evelyn were still guiding them. Finally, one afternoon, Dale brewed a pot of strong coffee, gathered his daughters at the kitchen table, and said, "All right, let's talk this through. All of it." He spread out the printouts from the library, the contract, and the orchard's overdue bills. "Here's what we know," he began. "Caldwell Innovation is huge. Yes, but they've got a lot of heat on them for ignoring small farmers. Victoria wants me to test prototypes here, help them design simpler machinery, and she's offering more money than I ever thought I'd see in one shot." He paused, glancing at the contract's salary figures. "It's enough to pay off the orchard debts and do some updates. But it also means letting them come in, set up shop, and possibly disrupt our routines." Natalie tapped her finger on a line in the contract. "They mention infrastructure improvements for irrigation and new mechanical systems. That could be beneficial. Dad, especially if we keep control over how they're installed." Chloe looked at him with wide eyes. "If we could keep the orchard from drying up every summer, that'd be good, right?" He nodded slowly. "It would. But I wonder about the intangible stuff. Privacy, our sense of independence. Sometimes big corporations want to own everything they touch." He felt a gnawing in his gut, the same feeling that hit him every time he was about to take a risk. And then there's the fact that I'm not a young guy, and this contract suggests I'd be guiding their engineers for a couple of years at least. I've never even set foot in a corporate boardroom. Natalie smiled gently. "You're the best mechanic I know. Dad, that's what they need, someone who's not polished by corporate nonsense. Someone who can say, 'No, this is how a farmer really does it.' Isn't that exactly what Mom's letter implies? Not letting pride or fear stop you from seizing a life-saving opportunity?" Chloe added, "We can't keep going as we are. I overheard the bank message. We're really close to losing the orchard." "Aren't we?" Her tone was trembling. Dale reached across the table to clasp his younger daughter's hand. But if we sign on with Caldwell, we might not just save the orchard, we could improve it." He leaned back, exhaling. In his mind, he could almost hear Evelyn's soft voice. He felt certain she would encourage him to be bold, to fight for the land by any means necessary. "All right, then," he said at last, a small tremor in his voice. "I'll call Victoria tomorrow and say yes. But I'll make it clear we do things on our terms. No more secrets, no more hidden agendas. We partner or nothing." Natalie and Chloe exchanged hopeful smiles. Outside, the orchard rustled, as if a gentle breeze carried their whispered prayers across the rows of apple trees. The next morning, Dale stepped onto the porch with his cell phone, an older model with a cracked screen, and dialed Victoria's direct number. She answered on the second ring, her voice level but clearly anticipating his decision. "I've given your offer a lot of thought," Dale began. "And if this orchard is going to be your test site, we need to be clear about a few things." He laid out his terms. The orchard would remain in his name. Caldwell would not forcibly claim or buy any portion of the land, and the local community's well-being would be prioritized. Also, any modifications must be discussed with him, no corporate crew barging in unannounced. Victoria listened quietly, then agreed without hesitation. "I've already drafted an addendum to the contract," she told him. "As soon as the board approves, I'll schedule a formal signing. And Dale, thank you for trusting me." That same afternoon, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up near the orchard's front gate. Chloe peered through the living room window. "Dad, there's a big car outside." "You expecting anybody?" Dale stepped outside, half expecting more corporate suits. Instead, a tall man in casual dress emerged, carrying a large crate. "Mr. Morgan," he called. "I'm Javier Morales, an engineer with Caldwell. Victoria sent me to drop off some prototype parts." It all felt surreal. Here was a Caldwell engineer at his orchard, delivering freshly manufactured components. Javier introduced himself politely to Natalie and Chloe, then asked Dale's permission to leave the crate in the barn. Inside were modular pieces, a newly designed drive shaft, a lightweight turbine pump, and a specialized wrench set for quick field repairs. "I'm on my way to another site after this," Javier explained, "but I wanted to say thank you." Victoria's been fighting for a more farmer-friendly approach, and if this goes well, it'll validate a lot of her ideas. She's been under huge pressure from the board to focus solely on profit margins. Dale liked Javier immediately. He seemed grounded, not the slick corporate type. As he and Dale hauled the crate into the barn, Javier asked for a quick orchard tour. Dale obliged, showing him the irrigation lines, the old tractor, and the mechanical well pump that dated back to the 1950s. Javier took photos and made notes on a tablet. The younger man's enthusiasm reminded Dale of Natalie's, brimming with technical curiosity. By the time Javier departed, Dale felt a cautious optimism brewing inside him. Over the next few days, the orchard entered a new phase of activity. Caldwell sent a small crew, only 3 people, to help install an improved irrigation pump. They worked alongside Dale and taught Natalie how to monitor water flow using a simple app on a refurbished tablet. Chloe followed them around, peppering them with questions about how water pressure was measured or how the sensors could detect pipe leaks. If the crew found her inquisitiveness annoying, they never showed it. Instead, they patiently explained each step, seeming genuinely excited to share their knowledge. Occasionally, Dale would catch himself marveling at how quickly life had changed. A mere fortnight ago, he was on the brink of financial disaster, with no hope in sight. Now, prototype engineering parts were being installed right on his property, and his daughters were learning advanced tech from actual experts. Evelyn's letter felt like a silent force guiding them. As each day passed, a sense of renewal quietly blossomed in Dale's chest. Not everyone in the county reacted positively. Walt Anderson dropped by one afternoon, leaning on his cane, eyes narrowed at the Caldwell logos on the crates stacked by Dale's barn. "So it's true," Walt grunted. "You've let a big city corporation park right on your land." Dale pursed his lips. "They're helping me upgrade the orchard. I remember stories," Walt interrupted, "about large companies that came in promising solutions but ended up swallowing farms or forcing expensive contracts on folks." His gaze flicked to the Caldwell employees adjusting the new irrigation pump. "Just be sure you're the one in control. Dale, once they dig their hooks in, might be too late to pull them out." Dale shrugged, trying to remain calm. "I appreciate your concern, but I set conditions." This orchard stays mine. I'm just their consultant. Walt looked unconvinced, but finally said, I trust you, not them. We'll see how it goes. Then he changed the subject. His own farm was struggling. New pesticide regulations threatened his crops, and the bank was crawling up his back. They stood there talking about property taxes and lean harvests, and a pang of guilt struck Dale. He wanted to say, maybe Caldwell can help you in too, but he knew Walt's pride would get in the way. Instead, he offered sympathy, promising they'd figure something out together if things got worse. Meanwhile, Natalie and Chloe were adapting swiftly to the new technology. Natalie took to the irrigation software like a fish to water, analyzing data on soil moisture and slope gradients. She rigged an alarm that notified her phone whenever a specific pressure threshold was crossed, meaning a leak or block. Chloe turned to more hands-on tasks, learning how to clean and maintain the new pump. She plastered a big sign on the barn door, Dale Morgan Family Orchard and Caldwell Test Site. She insisted that this was their orchard first. No matter what outsiders said, late in the week, a Caldwell representative named Mary Lee arrived with official documents: the orchard's status as a pilot site, Dale's consultancy contract, and the signed agreement to finance part of the orchard's overdue debts through a multi-year partnership. Mary was friendly but businesslike, explaining how the orchard would get a monthly stipend, provided Dale submitted progress reports. She also handed Dale a phone with a better camera and a specialized app to log any mechanical or agricultural observations. Victoria wanted you to have every tool you might need. Mary said she'll be in town soon, once the board formalities are done. Nightfall found Dale in the living room, scanning the contract's final print, while Chloe dozed off on the couch, and Natalie scribbled notes for a possible orchard expansion plan. He felt a quiet awe at how far they'd come in just a short span. Yes, there were risks, but also the promise of new life for these old fields. Evelyn's letter was tucked in his shirt pocket, close to his heart. He thought about her final request. Don't stop living just because I'm not there. She'd always dreamed of a better future, not just survival. Outside, the orchard was still under the moonlit sky, but something intangible had changed. For years, Dale had battled alone against the slow decline of the orchard, believing it was his burden to carry. Now, for the first time in a long while, the orchard felt alive with possibility. When Victoria finally returned, she arrived in more understated fashion, driving a nondescript truck rather than landing a plane. Dale met her by the barn where a group of Caldwell engineers were examining the old well system. She seemed pleased with the progress, greeting the crew, praising their collaboration with Dale's family. Looks like everything's running smoothly, she remarked, looking genuinely happy about it. Dale offered a handshake, which Victoria turned into a warm, two-handed clasp. I'm relieved, she admitted, stepping aside as a forklift rolled by carrying more crates. The board fought me. Hard. They wanted to push exclusively into hyper-automated models, but I kept insisting if the machines can't be repaired in the field, they're practically useless to most farmers. This orchard pilot program is now my proof of concept. They walked down an orchard row, the trees heavy with apples nearing harvest time. The warm sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the ground in shifting patterns. Victoria glanced upward, taking in the serenity. It's beautiful here, she said quietly. I see why you love it. Dale folded his arms across his chest. My father used to say the orchard's got its own rhythm. If you force it, it won't yield. You have to work with nature, not against it. I guess that's true for more than just apple trees, she smiled, but Dale noticed her composure waver for a brief second. You okay, he asked. She hesitated. I found some old letters from my father recently. He died years ago, but he once had a dream of bridging the gap between corporate engineering and small farms. I didn't even realize it until I stumbled on his notes. Now it feels like I'm picking up his unfinished work. Her voice carried the weight of personal history, and Dale recognized the undertone of loss. He knew that tune well. Before he could respond, Natalie called them over, pointing to the irrigation monitoring station. "Dad, Ms. Caldwell, there's a reading spike we need to see." They hurried to a cluster of digital sensors pegged into the soil near the orchard's west edge. On the small screen, the pressure had jumped erratically, indicating either a blockage or a leak. Sure enough, water gushed out from the base of a main line, flooding a narrow trench. Instantly, the Caldwell crew sprang into action. But Dale took the lead, shutting off the water at the main valve and instructing them on the orchard's layout. Victoria watched, impressed, as Dale quickly diagnosed the problem. One of the prototype hose connectors had cracked under pressure, perhaps due to a manufacturing defect or the orchard's slightly uneven terrain. Kneeling in the mud, he deftly replaced the connector with a spare from the barn, then tested the water flow again. The entire fix took less than 15 minutes, which made Victoria's face light up. "That's exactly what I've been telling the board," she said. "Farmers need to do field repairs on the fly. If the parts or the design make it impossible, you lose precious time and risk losing crops." Dale straightened, wiping mud on his jeans. "And that's the difference between an orchard thriving or failing," he said. "Sometimes you just have to get your hands dirty and fix it yourself. No time to wait for a specialized tech to drive hours to get here." Victoria nodded earnestly, a determined spark in her eyes. "Then let's keep showing them how it's done." Word got out about Dale's partnership with Caldwell, and curiosity rippled through the community. Some local farmers were intrigued. Could simpler, more adaptable equipment solve their woes? Others remained skeptical, suspicious of corporate motives. Nonetheless, a slow trickle of folks began stopping by to see the orchard's changes. They observed the new irrigation system with real-time sensors, the reinforced tractor parts, and the streamlined water pump. Dale often led these impromptu tours, feeling half embarrassed, half proud. Among the curious was Walt Anderson's nephew, Dennis, who owned a struggling soybean farm. Dennis watched as Dale demonstrated an easy-to-replace fuel filter on the orchard's old tractor, now fitted with Caldwell's prototype improvements. "My father would have loved this," Dennis commented, leaning in to examine the clamps. "He used to say you shouldn't have to be an engineer to keep a tractor running." Dale felt a surge of validation. This was precisely what he and Victoria had discussed at length. Meanwhile, Caldwell's board pressure on Victoria hadn't entirely subsided. She confided in Dale that some high-ranking members, like a man named Rutledge, were unimpressed by the small-scale orchard success. They wanted large-scale automation that raked in bigger profits. "He's been collecting data to undermine this program," Victoria said one afternoon, eyes clouded with concern. "He'll claim these field repairs aren't cost-effective or that we're pandering to a nostalgic view of farming. But if we can show enough real impact, he won't have a leg to stand on." Dale took her to see a portion of the orchard they'd temporarily cordoned off an experimental plot for new apple varieties. Natalie had researched soil pH adjustments, and the Caldwell engineers had devised a low-energy method to deliver nutrients. The trees, though newly planted, were sprouting leaves at a healthy rate 2 or 3 years, and we'll know if this crossbreed can thrive, Dale said. Victoria crouched to touch the soil. "Patience. That's one thing board members never understand," she murmured. Chloe, bounding up behind them, carried a notepad full of her own sketches. She showed Victoria a drawing of a small mobile orchard cart, a contraption on wheels she imagined could carry apples or tools around without needing a full tractor. Victoria knelt down, flipping through the sketches. "You drew the gear system here?" she asked, genuinely impressed. Chloe nodded enthusiastically. "Natalie helped me with the math. But yeah, I thought if we had something simpler for tasks besides big harvests, that'd save fuel and wear on the tractor." Staring at the sketches, Victoria's expression softened. You know, your dad mentioned how resourceful you girls are. You've got your mother's creativity, I bet. Chloe's grin widened, and Dale felt a bittersweet ache in his chest at the mention of Evelyn. Yes, he thought, they do. As the day wound down, the orchard glowed in the late afternoon sun, that gentle hour when everything seemed suspended in amber light. Looking around, Dale felt an unfamiliar sense of harmony, like the orchard was finally breathing easier. The new systems were working well, the old equipment revitalized. For the first time in years, he caught himself thinking they might actually push past survival into something resembling abundance. And maybe, just maybe, they could help their neighbors do the same. Then came the day everything nearly fell apart. A local news crew arrived, having been tipped off about a revolutionary orchard. The reporter, a sharp-eyed woman named Lana Hayes, interviewed Dale extensively about the Caldwell partnership. She filmed the prototype equipment, the orchard's refurbished tractor, and Dale's newly installed drip lines. Initially, it seemed like positive coverage until Victoria appeared on camera. Lana pounced with pointed questions about Caldwell's finances, rumors of boardroom conflict, and whether Victoria was using a small orchard to stage a PR stunt. Victoria tried to answer calmly, stating that the orchard pilot was a genuine attempt to create practical machinery for farmers. But the reporter pressed, "Isn't it true that certain board members believe this initiative is a waste of company resources, and that your personal interests might be overshadowing shareholder interests?" Dale, standing by with Chloe and Natalie, felt the sting of that accusation. Personal interest. Did Lana imply Victoria had some hidden agenda with them? The segment aired on the local station that evening, painting a picture of corporate infighting and hinting that Victoria had gone rogue with her orchard project. Within hours, social media buzzed with speculation that Caldwell was about to drop the partnership. One rumor claimed the orchard upgrades would be repossessed if the board lost patience. Another rumor said Dale was being used as a prop. Walt Anderson showed up the next morning, distressed by the gossip. "See, told you to watch out," he warned. "If the board undercuts her, they might just pull the rug from under all of you." Victoria arrived that afternoon, tension written in every line of her face. The board called an emergency meeting. She told Dale in a low voice, "Rutledge is claiming we're dumping money into pet projects that can't scale. They want to see data, a lot of it proving that simpler designs can be profitable. He's also attacking me personally for bypassing standard procedures." Dale's protective instincts flared. "What can we do?" he asked, trying to keep panic at bay. "I've got the orchard records, the improvements we've documented, the cost savings from less downtime." Victoria nodded, "Yes, gather all that. I might also need testimony from other farmers, if possible, about the potential benefits." That meant reaching out to folks in the county, some supportive, some leery, but with potential job cuts looming, it was time to show Caldwell's higher-ups there was real momentum here. Natalie immediately turned the living room into a command center, scanning receipts, collating water usage logs, writing up a concise summary of orchard yield comparisons. Chloe visited Walt and Dennis, politely asking if they'd share how the orchard's success might transfer to their farms. The next day, Dennis arrived with a handful of other curious farmers who expressed willingness to speak out, if it meant simpler, more affordable machinery. They had stories of breakdowns in the field, of losing critical harvesting days waiting for specialized parts. Night fell on the orchard with an undercurrent of anxious resolve. Dale and Victoria pored over spreadsheets at the kitchen table, heads bent together, while Natalie organized a digital slideshow. The orchard's transformation was undeniable: reduced water waste, decreased maintenance costs, and an actual plan for scaling up orchard production. Yet, how to convince a board that seemed predisposed to doubt Victoria looked at Dale with weary eyes. "We can't let them spin it as a vanity project," she said. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "We won't," he promised. "We'll face them together." The following week, Victoria returned to corporate headquarters in the city for the pivotal board meeting. Dale and the girls stayed behind at the orchard, waiting by the phone for updates. The plan was for Victoria to present their compiled data and, if necessary, bring Dale in via video conference to answer questions. Hours crawled by with no word. Finally, near dusk, Dale's phone buzzed. Victoria's voice sounded ragged with exhaustion, yet tinged with a strange relief. "They're sending a delegation to the orchard," she said. "Rutledge demanded an on-site inspection before any final decision. He wants to see if this is real or just a fancy show." Dale prepared as though for a harvest festival, but this time, the harvest to be gathered was the orchard's credibility. Natalie made color-coded posters comparing old data to new, while Chloe curated a practical demonstration hooking a standard garden hose to the orchard's main line to show how easily a replacement connector could be installed. Mary Lee, from Caldwell's staff, arrived with a small camera crew to record the inspection. "Don't worry," she assured Dale. "We'll keep this honest, but it doesn't hurt to show them what's working well." The Caldwell delegation arrived 2 days later in sleek SUVs, stepping out in crisp suits and polished shoes that sank into the orchard's soft soil. Rutledge, tall, gray-haired, eyes keen, led the group, his expression sour. He greeted Dale with a curt nod. "Mr. Morgan," he said in a clipped tone, "I look forward to seeing the evidence of this miracle orchard for myself." Victoria shot Dale an apologetic glance, as if to say, "Don't mind him." They toured systematically, starting with the barn where the prototypes were stored. Dale demonstrated how he could replace a belt, filter, or hose in minutes, no specialized tools required. Rutledge barely nodded, asking pointed questions about cost. Mary chimed in with the data on how many hours of downtime had been saved. They moved to the irrigation station, where Natalie explained the sensor logs in the app. Rutledge scrolled through the data with a furrowed brow, but asked no questions. Next, Chloe showcased the quick-fix connector for the pipeline, hooking and unhooking it with ease to illustrate how a single person could handle it. Finally, they gathered under the big oak tree near the orchard's center, Evelyn's favorite spot. Walt and Dennis were waiting with a few other farmers, ready to talk about how they might benefit from simpler designs. Walt was still cautious, but he spoke plainly. "If Caldwell can make a tractor that won't cripple me with repair bills every harvest, I might actually stay afloat. That's not a small thing, Mr. Rutledge. It's the difference between losing the farm that's been in my family for 4 generations or handing it down to my son someday." Rutledge remained stoic, but he listened. One of his colleagues, a woman named Teresa, asked follow-up questions about scaling the orchard's methods to larger operations. Dale explained that adaptability was key. A basic design can be expanded, but an overly complicated design can't easily be simplified. By the end of the tour, the sun sat low in the sky, painting everything in a warm glow. The group reconvened for final remarks. Rutledge cleared his throat, gave a small nod. "I see some potential," he murmured, as if the words pained him. Then he turned to Victoria. "We'll review this data carefully. For now, the orchard pilot continues." News traveled fast that Rutledge and the board decided not to shut down the orchard pilot. In fact, they granted Victoria provisional funding to expand the project. The tension that had gripped Steele, Natalie, and Chloe for weeks finally eased. A few nights later, Victoria arrived at the orchard unannounced, stepping out of her truck under a sky strewn with stars. She asked Dale if they could talk alone, and he invited her to walk through the rows. They ended up at the orchard's western edge, looking out over the horizon where a sliver of moon cast the trees in pale silver light. "It's funny," she said, leaning on a wooden post. "For most of my life, I've been in boardrooms and labs, trying to innovate, but I never felt so alive as I do here, among these fields." Dale nodded, pushing his hands into his pockets. "Something about the land makes you honest. No place for pretense." They walked a bit further, the wind rustling the leaves overhead, a comforting hush all around. They paused at the sight of the orchard's newest saplings, the experimental apple varieties. Victoria crouched down, touching the soil. They're so small now, yet in a few years, these could be bearing fruit. I guess that's how good ideas start, tiny, fragile, needing care. Dale watched her, thinking how different she seemed from the polished executive that first appeared. Here, in boots and jeans, she looked content. "You're building more than prototypes," he said quietly. "You're building a bridge between worlds." She stood, meeting his gaze in the moonlight. "Dale, I couldn't have done this without you. I need you to understand that. You and your daughters made it real." He felt a surge of warmth, but also a pang, thinking of Evelyn. "I just fixed your tractor," he joked softly. Victoria smiled. "Well, sometimes big changes start with small acts of kindness." There was a subtle shift in the air. She stepped closer, as if testing a boundary. "You've become important to me, Dale Morgan, to this orchard, to what I'm trying to do." And personally, Dale's heart thudded heavily in his chest. He was a widower in his 60s, trying to keep an orchard afloat, and here was a woman who seemed to care about him, not just his mechanical skills. He thought of Evelyn again, of her letter urging him to live, to keep loving, to embrace the future. He swallowed. "Life's short," he said, voice low. "Evelyn taught me that. If something or someone good comes along, we should hold on to it." Victoria's eyes shone with unspoken gratitude. She reached out, gently touching his hand. "We'll take it slow," she offered, as if sensing his jumbled emotions. "But I'd like to find out what we can be, together." In the distance, a faint glow from the farmhouse windows reminded Dale that Natalie and Chloe were inside, likely staying up too late, waiting to see if he'd return with news. He squeezed Victoria's hand. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'd like that too." The orchard around them was silent except for the nocturnal hum of insects, but to Dale it felt vibrant, alive with second chances. And as he led Victoria back toward the farmhouse, he could almost hear Evelyn's gentle voice in the rustling leaves. "Don't stop living." Dale, in the end, it wasn't about tractors or apple trees, irrigation lines or corporate boardrooms. It was about finding courage in the face of uncertainty, about holding on to a legacy while daring to let something new take root. The orchard that once stood on the brink now thrives, watered by risk, nourished by trust, and blossoming with hope. But no victory comes without cost, pride set aside, trust tested, old wounds gently reopened to let fresh air in. The farmer learned that strength isn't just in weathering storms alone, but in accepting the outstretched hand, even if it trembles. Change swept through these rows like wind across a field, reshaping the landscape and those who walked it. And though the orchard now stands stronger, its fruit sweeter for the struggle, there remains an echo of loss, a memory of the ones no longer here, but whose spirits linger in the rustling leaves and quiet twilight. The man knows he'll carry their lessons forever, as sure as seeds carried in the wind, as the sun dips low, painting the fields in amber and gold. One quiet thought remains: what risk would you take to protect the legacy you cherish?